You want to see the most beautiful thing I've ever filmed?
Back in the mid-2010s, it wasn't the best time to be a fan of shooters, unless of course you were super into the multiplayer scene, considering it was around this time that the genre was mostly dominated by multiplayer titles. Stuff like Halo 5, the Battlefront reboot, Battlefield Hardline, and Rainbow Six Siege, along with whatever yearly COD game we were up to by that point, also cementing the genre as being primarily online focused, with even the single-player focused games that we did get being of the same modern shooter ilk, with stuff like Far Cry, Borderlands, and Titanfall 2. None of which were bad, by the way, but just very much products of their time, with everyone sticking in the same kind of lane. That was, of course, all about to change very soon, as id Software were working on something that was going to shake the industry and the genre right up, as they were getting ready to bring back one of their most beloved game series.
Thank you. Wow.
Now, I'm not about to go and do a whole history lesson on id Software and how the company started, who worked there, what they like to eat for breakfast, and all that crap. I really hate when video retrospectives do that. So if you want to know all that kind of stuff, well, then just go and do what all those other content creators do when they're working on their scripts, and just go read Wikipedia. It is worth, however, bringing up two people that were highly involved in this upcoming release, which most people are already aware of, and that's Marty Stratton and Hugo Martin. One who is really responsible for pushing the project forward, and the other responsible for most of the creative decisions, really making this reboot so pivotal and the power fantasy it ultimately became. I mean, you got to remember that back in 2016, we still hadn't really had this whole retro FPS thing happening yet. We were definitely in the early days of all that though, considering we'd had the Wolfenstein reboot with The New Order in 2014, which brought back things like fixed health as opposed to regenerating health, along with the removal of a weapon limit, letting the player carry around an entire arsenal in their back pocket. It might have still had a bit of a narrative focus with lots of cutscenes and cinematics. Not to mention, it's often more of a cover shooter than it is a faster paced movement shooter. But some of the old school shooter trends were definitely there. And then with that standalone follow-up in 2015, The Old Blood, Machine Games leaned even more into that trend, with that campaign feeling decidedly old school. As for proper throwback shooters, well, we hadn't really entered that era yet, and Dusk, for instance, was still in its pre-alpha. Then, of course, Doom came out, and from that point on, the rest is history. Now, I will admit that I was actually super critical of this thing all those years ago. In fact, I was pretty much convinced that it was going to be a total train wreck. I remember reading how they'd only shown that early gameplay demo to people who attended QuakeCon, which I was certain was because the game was no good, and that they were trying to just hide all these bad impressions. And then even later on, when that footage was released to the public, I still ignorantly stood my ground and tried to find reasons to complain. I even made a reaction video where I watched it in real time and recorded a live commentary with all my impressions, something which thankfully I never uploaded, because it would have aged about as gracefully as, well, a lot of my videos. You got to remember though that at that point in time, id Software really didn't have a very good track record. Like the last game we'd had before that, for instance, was Rage in 2011, which, I mean, was perfectly fine, but left a lot of people, myself included, kinda disappointed with just how unfocused the whole thing felt. Where it seemed like it was 70% of a finished game that they just spread out for a 12-hour-long campaign.
Pleasure doing business with you.
So yeah, going into Doom 2016, I was at my most cynical, pig-headed peak. But I do remember that early on there, where you get to that now iconic intro sequence, with the Slayer cracking his knuckles before it cuts to that logo, that I knew we were in good hands. Which incidentally is also the way that I start my day, cracking my knuckles before I sit down on the throne to drop a fat shit. So let's talk about it. I mean, it has just hit its 10-year anniversary, and yeah, what else is going on right now? Now, so far as the premise goes, basically what's happening in this version is that it does keep the same concept of the UAC opening a portal to hell. It just puts a different spin on it, where this time the UAC has found a way to harness something called Argent energy through hell directly, with Earth at the time suffering from a very believable energy crisis, and this new energy source being seemingly limitless and a perfect solution. with the main bloke tied to all of this being the UAC's president Samuel Hayden, who seems to have good intentions, but is ignoring the very obvious moral dilemma as to where this energy is coming from.
I feel I should apologize for what's happened here.
Yeah, you probably should.
On top of that, the UAC's been sending expedition teams to hell during all of this, documenting the place, bringing back artifacts and all that stuff.
What could possibly go wrong?
Which has led to the creation of a cult comprised of people corrupted by its influence, with the main antagonist, a woman named Olivia Pierce, being at the center of it, responsible for opening the portals and allowing these demons to cross over.
She is trying to tear open the portal between our world and theirs.
Where at one point I think it even says something along the lines of the casualties being in the tens of thousands. And whereas Hayden at least has the best of intentions, despite being morally questionable, Olivia is just a much more clear-cut archetypal villain.
You could not have saved them anyway.
The kind of person that just wants to watch the world burn, literally, intent on bringing hell to earth. The best character of all, though, has to be Vega, that optimistic-sounding artificial intelligence that's helping the player throughout the game. And I think that if AI in real life talked and acted like this thing, well, we'd have already had Judgment Day 10 times over by now.
Hello, I am Vega, the sentient intelligence assigned to Mars.
I love that little guy.
I really appreciate too how the game really forces you to stand still and listen to people talk. I mean, there's a few key moments early on there where Samuel Hayden's crapping on about this, that, and the other thing. During a really fun sequence too, where the Slayer quite famously destroys a bunch of equipment, preventing the guy from communicating in the first place.
I think we can work together and resolve this problem in a way that benefits us both.
And then there's a few brief sequences later on with Olivia and Hayden directly, where you do have to stand still for a bit and take in some exposition. But in the case of that stuff, that's fine, because all of it is for the development of the story. I mean, it's vital, crucial plot information that's moving things along, not just needless diatribe for the sake of having someone talk. And outside of that, it mostly keeps things from the player's perspective, as this traditionally mute protagonist is constantly choking on his own rage. All of which is also very similar to the premise in Doom 3.
Oh, really?
With Dr. Petruga being another corrupted USC scientist, and seeing hell as this resource or a product that can be used as a weapon of mass destruction. Where again, like, they might have gotten away with all of it if it wasn't for that meddling Slayer. A dude who's just such a badass and so unstoppable that even the biggest and the baddest demons are afraid of him. It's kind of like, think of that scene from the first Terminator movie when the T-800's going around the police station shooting the whole place up, and yeah, that's kind of who you're playing as here. In fact, this guy was responsible for causing so much chaos and destruction that the only way the demons could stop him was to lock him up in a sarcophagus, knock him out, and just hope that he never woke up. Which is actually how the game opens, with Hayden purposefully waking him up with no other options left, where he comes to all delirious and dazed, kinda like how it feels after a big night out drinking when you're in your late 30s. He doesn't waste any time either, getting straight into cracking skulls, kicking gum and chewing ass, and yeah, he's all out of ass. Leaving no doubts either that these demons are in big, big trouble.
Now you're all in big, big trouble.
He's not just wearing a generic Space Marine outfit now either, instead wearing the brand new and now iconic Praetor suit, being this kind of ancient blessed armor that gives him all these extra powers and abilities. Namely the benefit of being able to drop from great heights and not take any damage, through something the suit calls impact compensation. And yeah, as a 40-year-old man whose knees and joints are getting compromised more and more every day, believe me, there is a benefit in having a piece of kit like that. Also being something you're frequently improving and upgrading by finding these tokens throughout the levels. So overall, like, it's a really clever way to introduce this new interpretation of a beloved character without ever drowning us in exposition. You get this ambiguous narration from a mysterious character establishing how powerful the guy is, and that's really all you need.
Rip and tear until it is done.
I mean, there is something to be said there about how purposely vague the backstory was. I feel like there's a tendency with media these days for writers to just spoil and explain like every single little detail possible. I mean, look at what they've done with something like the Aliens and the Predator series, where they make so many iterations and spin-offs that there's just no mystique to anything anymore, because every single plot aspect has been explored. Doom is also kind of guilty of that to a point as well. I mean, not so much here in the 2016 game, but definitely later on in Eternal and then during the Dark Ages. Which, on the one hand, is good. I mean, yes, you can get some answers, but like sometimes some things are better off left unsaid. I mean, we're playing as this super badass, incredibly pissed off ancient warrior who is great at killing demons. What else do you need to know? I don't think it was actually confirmed back when this came out either, even though most people assume so, in that this was the same guy from the original games, who'd actually been fighting evil in hell for so long that he'd quite literally lost his marbles, existing solely at this point just to rip and tear, able to jump, double jump and pull himself up ledges, all of which was vastly different to the slower and more methodical gameplay we had in Doom 3, where you move through these far more linear and restrictive environments where about the most mobility you needed was just stepping left or right. And then compared to the original games, which just depended on how good you were at circle strafing. Now, that's obviously not to say that those old games were bad, because that's really not the case, and I'm not even about to start entertaining that argument of how Doom 3 was a bad Doom game. But yeah, comparing the movement in this to how the old games felt is like comparing lawn bowls to highlight. And also being vastly different to that footage we had of the original Doom 4, where I think it's safe to say that judging off that early gameplay, we totally dodged a bullet.
You got that right.
Now, I'm not sure if it's ever been confirmed by any of the devs that did software, but I think most people would agree that Doom 2016 was absolutely influenced by Sergeant Mark's infamous Brutal Doom mod. And in a lot of ways, we owe as much to that mod for keeping the series alive as we do id Software's efforts with Doom 2016. It's just that this game obviously took it to another level with the benefit of far higher production values. But I mean, all of the pieces are there. You've got the super violent and much more aggressive combat, along with that high focus on executions, or glory kills as they'd come to be known as. Where once an enemy's health is low enough, they'll be staggered for a few seconds and can be executed, dropping much needed health pickups. Something which becomes very important on the higher difficulties given just how much damage you often take. And I do want to say that I've never understood the complaints that some people seem to have around this. Specifically that argument in how it's bad simply because it forces you to wait literal seconds while you watch those animations. Personally, I don't ever really get bored of these. Plus, there is like half a dozen different animations for every single demon as well, depending on which direction you're standing and attacking them from. And even then, like, if it's such a drag that you can barely sit still for 2 seconds, you can equip a rune to make them faster anyway. But yeah, like either way, not really a mechanic that the old games were known for. It is otherwise a Doom game through and through, with all of the classic weapons and then some. You got the pistol, the shotgun, super shotgun, chain gun, rocket launcher, plasma rifle, and the BFG, along with, of course, that classic enemy lineup. And what it does do very well is the way it incorporates so many of these old mechanics and features, but then just updates them all so effortlessly. Like the Berserk Pack, for instance, was an item that originally took quite a bit of skill to use, massively buffing your melee damage to the point that you could punch most demons to death. With the catch being, though, that the enemies didn't just stand around and take it, and would still actively fight back and attack, which in the case of enemies like imps or the Kako demons could be a problem if they launched a projectile right into your face. Now though, in the reboot, you're practically invulnerable to everything, and all it takes is a single press of a button and you're quite literally ripping enemies apart with your bare hands. Doesn't matter how big or small they are, the Slayer's gonna tear these assholes limb from limb, and it looks fucking awesome.
Merciful Jesus.
Other power-ups were straight out lifted out of the Quake games, particularly Quake 3, most notably the haste power-up, which lets you zip all over the place at a much faster speed, also increasing how quickly you fire your weapons. Along with that, there's the quad damage, which does exactly what it says on the box, increasing the damage of your weapons 4 times over. And being so synonymous now with the Doom series that I reckon there's people out there who didn't even know it originated in Quake. In fact, a lot of these combat arenas feel like mini deathmatch maps, with jump pads and portals so you can quickly get from one side to the other, with it also definitely being responsible for helping to popularize that whole arena-style shooter trend, of games locking you into this cordoned-off spot until you've killed everything that's spawned in. I also really remember thinking it was awesome how when you found key cards or skull keys, how they were now picked up in real time by the player. You didn't just run over these things and have them sort of appear in your inventory. Now there was this unique animation where you'd see your character picking them up for reals. And then shortly after that, when you got to the panel or whatever it was it needed to use it on, he'd pull it out again and slot it or scan it where it needed to go. Even funnier is the few times where you need someone's retinal scan or fingerprint to enter some kind of locked area. where the Slayer just outright rips their arm or head off to use when need be.
Access granted. Hello, Dr. Peters.
The other throwbacks also extend to the enemies and the environments, with pretty much all of those original demons coming back in one form or another. You've got all the various zombie men who come in a bunch of new variants now, with some even armed with energy shields. There's the imps, which have now been reduced in size, becoming far more nimble and making them an actual threat in high numbers. As something of a combination between how they were in Doom 1 and 2 and then Doom 3, which also makes far more sense, given the name. Considering imps are typically described as being smaller and lesser demons.
Demonic presence eliminated.
As opposed to fully sized demons with perfectly sculpted abdominal muscles. The Barons of Hell and Hell Knights look visually the same as they did in Doom 3, but are now far more mobile as well, being vastly more dangerous. And these guys have definitely had one of the biggest upgrades, especially compared to the old games where they were basically just walking tanks. I mean, they're still tanks, but now they're tanks that can Hulk jump to zero in on the player. And similarly with the Revenants, who can now zip all over the place using a jetpack, making these guys harder to hit too. But also, I think, weirdly, one of the more charming demons. The one it feels like they've changed the most, though, are the Pinky Demons. Because in the reboot, these things are heavily armored in the front, leaving that big old tuchus of theirs the only thing that takes any damage. The thing is, though, as unique as this new design is, I do think that it doesn't always gel that well during combat. Simply because once one of these guys is in the area, you pretty much have to focus on them. Otherwise, it's like turning your back on the ocean or a pot of boiling pasta, where the second you're not watching, you're guaranteed to get fucked from behind.
Holy shit!
The idea is to bait them into walls, giving you some precious seconds to get behind them and attack, but in areas where you've often got like a half a dozen different demons running around, all in different directions, it does kind of mess up the combat flow. Definitely a much different tactic to the old games though, where it was really just about shooting them in the face as quickly as possible. And the demons that seem to have had the least changes in that regard are the Mancubus and the Caco demons.
Demonic presence at unsafe levels.
Which are still these mostly just slow lumbering assholes that need to be shot in the face as quickly as possible. Just with the main difference being that if you get too close now, they've got some pretty gnarly, devastating close-range attacks. Like with the Mancubus using a flamethrower. Well, yeah, in fact too, one of my favorite environments in this reboot is an area that's a blatant homage to an old Doom 2 map called Dead Simple, with these 4 platforms strewn around the room and a Mancubus planted on each of them.
Something very familiar about all this.
The other thing worth noting is that there is a distinct lack of Lost Souls, Arachnotrons, and Archvoles, a couple of which did eventually come back in Doom Eternal. And look, I know that the Lost Souls are technically in the game, but I say we lack them because although they are, we only see these things I think a handful of times in the entire campaign, where they mostly just function as these screaming kamikaze bombs. Bit of a downgrade to how they were in Doom 3. I mean, those things were pretty much nightmare fuel. We do, however, have a new enemy here with the Summoner, which is a distinctly female-looking demon that teleports all over the place and spawns in other enemies. Also screeching and making a hell of a lot of noise to purposefully attract the player to their presence. And yeah, I'm sure there's a joke there about the only female demon being such an attention seeker, but yeah, I'll leave that one there. They are about the closest thing we do get to an Archvile though, and also just about as annoying, because it can be super hard to actually hit them. Then later on, we do get the return of the Cyber Demon and the Spider Mastermind, with these two serving as the primary boss fights. Yeah, and proper boss fights too, with giant health bars, different attack patterns and phases you need to adapt to. As opposed to bosses you could easily avoid and defeat by simply just sidestepping left or right, or whilst holding down the left mouse button. And all vastly superior to the Cyber Demon fight we had in Doom 3, where about all you did there was run around this giant area avoiding rockets, taking out the nearby enemies until you charged up the Soul Cube. Oh yeah, and don't ever get me started on the utterly dreadful boss fight against Betruga and that Doom 3 expansion pack. Plus, it was also pretty cool because in the case of the Spider Mastermind, we hadn't actually seen this thing since Doom 2. And also the fact that it was a transformed version of Olivia Pierce tied it all together with a story, and didn't just make it this random creature you were coming across with no backstory or purpose. So yeah, like overall, it was pretty awesome seeing all of these iconic Doom elements coming together. And it extended across to pretty much every area of the presentation. In fact, if you listen carefully during certain levels, you'd even hear classic Doom musical motifs as well. You know, the kind of thing that your ears might not pick up on, but your brain did. Oh yeah, and on that note, like, we've obviously got to talk about the music, composed by the relatively unknown, at the time anyway, Mick Gordon. Now that's not to say that he wasn't already well established in the industry, having done music for Killer Instinct, and even some great work on the Wolfenstein reboots. But the stuff he did for Doom was definitely the game that truly put him on the map, where Eternal would then finally skyrocket him even further for multiple reasons. And I know that people go on and on about tracks like Rip and Tear in the BFG division, and yeah, like, credit where credit is due, those songs are definitely great and get you amped up. But for me, the absolute best track in the game has to be Welcome to Hell, that music you first hear throughout your first trip down south. Now this whole level just starts off like absolute cinema. You get your first glimpse of the place, seeing this terrifying looking structure above you, and can hear the voice of some unseen overlord alerted to your presence.
He is here.
You move through some tunnels, getting some nice environmental storytelling through all these visions of that expedition group that went there before you, before soon getting into combat and then hearing that music. Yeah, still the absolute best musical example of capturing the whole I'm not trapped in here with you, you're trapped in here with me vibe that the reboot is going for. And the way that the music dynamically shifts throughout the level depending on whether or not you're in combat, along with this juxtaposition between the ambient choir stuff, is just amazing. It's got this rhythm and pulse that just never seems to stop, with the sounds of explosions and gunfire almost serving as the lyrics, and genuinely motivating you to keep going, doling out this brand of justice that only the Slayer can provide. Some people put on stuff like Barry White or Marvin Gaye on the playlist to get in the mood, but nah son, if I'm boning, it's to Welcome to Hell. And I've lost count the amount of time that I've loaded Doom up just to play through this level alone.
That's good stuff.
Visually too, this whole area is a great example of just how utterly gorgeous this game still looks. And it's just kind of staggering to think that it's 10 years old now, considering it could easily pass itself off as a 2026 game. Some of those moments when you're on the surface of Mars and can just look off far into the distance showcase some really gorgeous vistas. And the platforming often involves you making your way across these vast industrial structures, really emphasizing the scale of this UAC operation that's been going on here. It's definitely got a much darker vibe than Doom Eternal had as well, with it having this really grim tone. Again, kinda like Doom 3. Also addressing those mass casualties suffered on the base, and making it very clear that the people stationed here faced their demise in some grisly and very nasty ways. And I know that Doom Eternal also had a pretty bleak outlook on the prospect of humanity surviving, but it definitely doesn't feel as gritty as 2016 does. For a game that's also largely set on one planet, they do a good job of mixing up a lot of the various environments too, and to make these areas of the facility seem different from one another. There's a really cool lab environment later in the game, for instance, where you see the remains of this mancubus on an operating table that's been completely cut apart and dissected. And one of my favourite areas in the game is one that takes place on a much colder part of the planet, the one that houses Vega's server. Which makes sense too, right? Given that Vega probably uses so much power and generates so much heat that they have to put the dude in literal sub-zero temperatures. Or else he'd probably overheat more than an early 2000s Nvidia GPU. And then in typical Doom fashion, every single one of these areas is just jam-packed with secrets to find. And overall, if you're really taking your time, it's about a 15 or 14 hour long campaign all up, and one that really does take a little bit to get going, which has probably been done to be fair and balanced for the sake of the demons. Considering that if the whole thing started off with the Slayer being at maximum power, well, they'd probably have rage quit before you even got a chance. Yeah, jokes aside though, things do start off kinda slow, and for the first proper level, you've only got the pistol and the shotgun, with the former being absolutely woeful. Arguably even worse than the original Doom pistol. I've often kinda wondered if this was supposed to be a throwback to the blaster in Quake 2, because I know that Marty Stratton also worked on that game back in the day, where it often felt like you were shooting buried jizz at your enemies and seemed to do about as much damage. And even if you're like me and dumb enough to waste resources trying to upgrade it, it's still about as effective as a wet fart. There's even a weapon challenge in there where you have to kill a Mancubus with it, and it would honestly happen faster if you just waited the clock out and let the Mancubus die of old age. The shotgun, on the other hand, isn't bad, but without weapon mods at this point in the game, it really lacks versatility, where about all you can do is just spam shots over and over. Later on, you get the explosive shot and the burst fire mode, which massively improves its effectiveness, but at this point, it's about as routine as FPS shotguns go. Finally, you do get throwable grenades, which is one of the game's new equipment mechanics, which is handy and destructive, but is also limited by its really long cooldown. So yeah, at this point, you're pretty limited in what you can use. Thankfully though, it doesn't take too long before things start to pick up, as you find more and more weapons, like the plasma rifle in the second level. But more importantly, you start unlocking weapon mods for all of these. With the plasma rifle having what's easily one of the best in the game with its stun bomb, which works against pretty much every single enemy, stunning them for a few seconds and leaving them completely vulnerable. An attack which is very effective against one enemy type in particular. Yeah, those pesky pinky demons. Where firing a stun shot at them before heading around the back and going to town with the super shotgun, I think is by far the best method. Along with that, you also first get the chainsaw here, which goes on to become a pretty central mechanic, being a very handy way of getting back ammo in a pinch. Compared to Eternal though, where you outright had to rely on this thing, the levels in Doom 2016 still had items put around the levels in a relatively preset manner, with the chainsaw more being useful as a quick and handy way to get rid of some of the tougher demons. Along with coming across the heavy assault rifle that comes with both a tactical scope for long-range attacks, along with the arguably more useful micro missiles. It's that third level in the Foundry though, where things really start to heat up, if you'll excuse the pun.
Hot stuff coming through.
But more importantly than that is that you first get the rocket launcher here, which by this point has brought your total weapons up to 5, where now you go from being pretty dangerous to a full-on threat, where by the time after that, when you've soon got the super shotgun, the Gauss gun, and the chain gun, you're practically unstoppable. One thing I still find really awesome about the Reboot 2 is the way that it handles the BFG, really giving this thing the credence it actually deserves. Now the BFG in that original game, for instance, it wasn't bad by any means, and it could still clear out most of the room in a single blast. But it did also share ammo with the plasma rifle, using the same cells as ammunition. And the long and short of it is that the plasma rifle was by far the more effective option, giving you more bang for your buck, so to speak. Now the BFG in Doom 2016 is a cross between that one and the one in Doom 3, again being given its own ammo type, which is also in far less supply. And when you fire it now, it will legitimately clear out an entire room, also doing heavy damage to the bosses, making it a real get out of jail free card and massively turning the tide of the combat if used properly, with there even being certain arenas where it even seems like they're kind of forcing the player to use it. And while you still can get through these with a bit of patience and some perseverance, it's also just far easier to drop a mega deuce on everything at once and call it a day. Even just that whole sequence when you first find this thing and decimate an entire room of zombies, it's still one of the most memorable moments in the entire franchise.
Very impressive.
Alongside first getting the E1 there made and seeing those Barons of Hell popping up. The only bit of the Slayer's kit I've ever found kind of redundant is the hologram and the siphon grenade. Now the hologram is like Doom's version of the Holo Duke from Duke Nukem 3D, which puts out this projection that distracts enemies. And I guess it's handy, but it's just kind of something I forget exists. Whereas the siphon grenade leeches health from enemies and gives it back to the player, which is again kinda handy, but I think most people, if they're low on health, are instead going to focus on trying to do glory kills. I do want to say as well that even after replaying through this yet again, I still haven't really found a consistently useful purpose for the heavy assault rifle and the chain gun. And again, like, it's not like they're bad weapons, but it feels like the combat in Doom seems to work best with the single-firing, harder-hitting guns. Which is why if you watch footage of most people playing this thing seriously, you know, as in like sweating their way through every encounter, you'll often see them swapping back and forth primarily between the super shotgun, the rocket launcher, and the Gauss gun. With the Gauss gun more or less being like another Quake throwback in the way that it's pretty much a railgun, only a railgun that can also be charged up to do even more damage. Whereas the super shotgun is, well, it's the super shotgun. Something that's also responsible for bringing back the popularity of double-barreled boomsticks again in shooters. And taking advantage of that fast weapon swap, cancelling out the reload animation, all that stuff by swapping back and forth between these harder hitting weapons is just, you know, infinitely more effective than leaning on the left mouse button with the assault rifle or the chain gun. I still reckon too that the rocket launcher's lock-on triple fire mode is the best alternate fire mode in the entire game. And I don't know, like the benefit of hitting something quickly with 3 rockets back to back can't be overstated. With those annoying summoner demons, for instance, a single lock-on is almost always going to put them right into a stagger state, immediately removing one of the most dangerous and annoying enemy types from the arena in seconds.
Shut up, bitch!
People often argue too how you can beat the entire game with the super shotgun, which, you know, I guess is true, but I've always thought that that was a bit of a bizarre argument to make. I mean, you can beat pretty much every Doom game using just one weapon if you really wanted to. The point is though, like, why would you? After you reach the second level, the game introduces challenges, which is where you can start completing 3 different requirements to earn extra upgrade points. Like doing different kinds of glory kills on enemies or killing a certain amount of demons with a specific weapon, all of which changes for every single level. Meaning there's always something different you're trying to complete, adding another extra layer to the combat so it's not just mindlessly using the same few tactics over and over. And then even within each weapon there's certain requirements to max them out as well, with there actually being a benefit to doing all of this, considering it unlocks some pretty gnarly upgrades. Like for instance, once you max out the super shotgun, you can fire that thing twice without reloading. Maxing out the Gauss gun's charge mode lets you move around while it's still charging up, making it even more effective. And then the final upgrade for the micro missiles for the assault rifle allows you to just infinitely fire those things with no charge up time. It's kind of like id Software wanted this to be broken, overpowered, and over the top. It's also the first Doom game that lets you go back in and replay through old missions, carrying over all your progress as well with your weapons and upgrades, making it seem even more broken when you go back to replay earlier stages. Where it's kind of like that meme about going back to a starting area in an RPG once you've hit the max level. And there's just so much stuff to unlock here too, where you're almost always trying to acquire some new gadget, skill, or rune. Like, it's really addictive. Now we get to the part of the video though where I talk about all the stuff I don't like. Starting with something I absolutely hate, and that's the rune trials. Actually, you know what? That's not fair, okay? I don't hate them, I just find that some of them are really tedious to get through. Considering that a lot of them aren't really about skill, more so it's just about learning and memorizing a specific pattern. Be it some kind of route you need to take through the environment or the order and locations of enemies that spawn in. Completing these challenges not only unlocks a new rune for the player to equip, but more importantly, after every few of these you unlock a new rune slot. And it's an issue for me because I have this weird OCD thing where I have to fucking complete every single little side task in a game like this, even though half of these runes aren't even all that good. But on the scale of problems that I think Doom 2016 has though, this thing doesn't even register as a blip. What I would say though is one of this game's biggest problems is that unlike Doom Eternal, it lacks that whole one-hit kill protection thing. You probably know what I'm referring to, but it's that system in Doom Eternal where instead of getting obliterated by an attack that would normally kill you, the game instead drops you down to low health, and then gives you an auditory and visual warning that you've been messed up. Where you've got like a second or so to get out of the way and retaliate, or instead get your affairs in order before eating shit. The point is that it didn't just outright kill you, making it a very fair and balanced mechanic. However, back in Doom 2016, this still wasn't a thing, and there's lots of instances when it feels like you're getting killed in a single hit, because you are. And it doesn't even really matter how high your health is, like you might have 40 or 50 HP, and it can still seemingly happen. Just making it really frustrating at times, and one of the main reasons why I've never bothered trying to beat this thing on Ultra Nightmare. Also as well because I prioritize my mental health. I would say as well that the pacing of the story is a bit off at times.
This way, please.
I mean, there's this whole climactic sequence when you get sent to hell for the first time, which is pretty damn epic and seems like it's leading on to something big, only for the player to just come back from hell soon after, before going back to hell again later on to get the Crucible, before coming back again, and then going back to hell a third and final time for the fight against the Spider Mastermind. And yeah, like, it is pretty cool, but I don't know, it does kind of devalue the place just a little bit, considering you've already wiped the floor with whatever hell's thrown at you 2 times already. Just kind of takes away a bit of the mystique of the place and makes it just a change of scenery, as opposed to it being this horrific place of eternal damnation and suffering that you're happy to see the end of. I mean, look at Hell in Doom 3, for instance. Like, it felt oppressing and terrifying. It was dark and dangerous, and all these familiar demons also had modified appearances, making them suitably more unsettling. You'd hear distorted and muffled cries of pain off in the distance, and by the end of that level, you were genuinely happy to be back on an abandoned Mars base overrun with demons. In fact, the first half of that sequence is more or less full-on horror, using really disturbing imagery and bizarre audio work to really heighten how unpleasant this place was and make it memorable. The kind of thing that's perfect for a video game interpretation of the worst place ever. And then the second and final time you went back there was for that very short final encounter against the Cyber Demon. For the Slayer in Doom 2016, though, every time he goes back to hell, it's more of a horror moment for the demons. And I guess ultimately that is the kind of problem when you're playing as a dude who, in terms of the lore, is just so bad that even the bad guys are scared of him. You know, in the way that it does take away a lot of the power from them being these enemies that you're supposed to be fearful of. Is it a bad thing? Well, no, it's not. I guess it's just different. And they push this even further in the sequels, where even other surviving humans are scared of the Slayer as well.
Oh my god. It's him.
The only thing I think has genuinely aged poorly when it comes to Doom 2016 is its whole multiplayer component. And I don't know if you guys really played this on launch or if it was different depending on regions, but I just remember this being super generic. I don't know, it was fun enough, I guess, back then when the community was still super active, but yeah, I can't imagine going back and replaying it now. Obviously, the biggest thing that came out of this series, though, was ultimately Doom Eternal in 2020. And whereas Doom 2016 might have helped to bring back this whole throwback shooter genre, Doom Eternal was the one that truly cemented it. Probably helped too by the fact that when it launched, most of the world was told they had to stay indoors. And I don't think that I even really need to talk about this, simply because most people already know about it. I know that opinions are like assholes in that everyone has one and a lot of them stink, but love it or hate it, you just can't deny the objective impact it had on the industry. I mean, you'd lose count trying to list all the shooters that followed that took influence from it, even just in the way that so many of them focused on letting the player manage their own resources. Weirdly though, I do think that in a way, Doom 2016 is more replayable than Eternal is. Simply because with 2016, it's far easier to pick it up again and get right back into it. Whereas Eternal has so many features and mechanics and idiosyncrasies you need to come to grips with. It's like giving up playing golf or tennis and then suddenly trying to get back into it after taking a 6-month break. And it is a bit of a victim of its own evolution and advancements in that way, in the sense that you just can't really get back into it unless you're really getting back into it. In the case of Doom 2016, it's like, do you understand first-person shooters? Well, fine, you're going to be good at this. With Doom Eternal though, it's more, do you understand Doom Eternal? And I think that that does take away some of the enjoyment from replaying it in a casual sense, because you simply just can't play it again for fun without also getting right back into all the intricacies of its many systems. If anything though, it really shows you just how tremendous the jump was between both titles, and then even more so when you compare it to the direction they went with the Dark Ages.
Damn.
My real main goal though when I was replaying this was just to see ultimately if it still held up, because there is a tendency sometimes for older games to feel like they've suffered as time has passed. Doom 2016 though, you know what? It largely hasn't. And in fact, if anything, I think it's gotten better with age. Like a fine wine, an old bottle of scotch, an Italian sports car, or Salma Hayek. The years have definitely been kind to this thing, and that's not something you can say about every game either. So yeah, to id Software, well done. I mean, you guys have got a game here that kicked ass 10 years ago and is still kicking ass now in 2026, and one that I've never been so glad to be wrong about.